The world is filled with stories of fabulous treasures. But are there treasures of a different kind? Could it be that treasures of knowledge are still being discovered in the world's most studied book? Treasures that could reveal the future of every person on earth. Is it possible that hidden within the text formed by the ancient Hebrew letters of the Torah is information that only God could have put there? Have these three men, Eliyahu Rips, Doran Whitsom, and Yoav Rosenberg, breached the barrier between science and religion? Is there a Bible code of such stunning accuracy that modern events like the bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City, the razor-thin margin of victory for George W. Bush in the presidential election, and the destruction of the World Trade Center in New York were all foretold thousands of years ago? Could it be that our future has always been in the hands of those who have gone before? And do we now have a scientific method of literally reading what the future will be? The stunning possibilities in this episode of Ancient Secrets of the Bible. We are about to look through the pages of the first continuous recorded history of mankind in the book we call the Holy Bible, as we continue our investigation into some of its most controversial stories and try to answer some very tough questions. Is the Bible a reliable account of miraculous interventions, of angels, apostles, and the power of prayer? Or is it just a collection of stories and myth, as some modern-day critics suggest? Both Bible skeptics and proponents from around the world have contributed to this exciting discussion. Some of these biblical revelations may shock and surprise you.
Every major event in world history, every major figure in world history appears to be encoded in the Bible.
For centuries, science and religion have at least appeared to be on opposite sides of the fence. Not all scientists, however, believe the two concepts were mutually exclusive. Is it possible that modern scientists, using today's most sophisticated tools, have finally bridged the gap between science and religion? Are we witnessing science actually proving ancient religious tradition? We've come a long way since 1450 and Gutenberg's first movable type printing press. Today, any passage can be accessed at the push of a button. In just a matter of minutes, everything in the Bible related to a particular subject can be accessed, collated, and printed out. But for all our sophistication and technological skill, we haven't been able to improve on the words. What they say and what they represent remains paramount to those who believe in the Bible. The thing that has recently captivated biblical scholars and scientists alike, however, is the notion that there might be something more here than just the words that are on the surface. There appears to be scientific evidence that embedded within the Hebrew letters of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, there is a code that tells of events far into the future. As you might suspect, this idea has generated a great deal of controversy.
If you ask a geographer what would be the consequences if the Earth was found to be really flat after all, you're not likely to get a very sensible answer, except maybe a laugh. My attitude to the Bible code, after having studied it for so long, is very similar. There is so little evidence for it, so minimal a case has been made in favor of it that I don't even really consider the possibility anymore of it being true.
But all other arguments aside, one fact is indisputable. Since Gutenberg printed the first Bible, it has become the most pervasive book in the world. Every year, more copies of the Bible are printed than any other book ever published. What is there in this book that makes it so interesting? Are we simply fascinated by the history of a small group of people in a dusty corner of the world? Or is it the content, a philosophy for living? Can it be, as some historians suggest, that it is the very foundation of all Western law and culture? The Old Testament, specifically the Torah, or the first 5 books of the Bible, is, according to its adherents, a history of the Supreme Being's interaction with mankind, specifically the children of Israel. Yet it is filled with fantastic stories that many scholars insist cannot be true. What are we to make of these new scientific studies that suggest there is more, much more to the Bible? Today, the question being asked in ever-widening circles is simply, is there, in fact, a Bible code? More importantly, perhaps, does this code contain information about Hitler and the Holocaust, about the reestablishment of Israel, the 6 Days War? Did it actually anticipate the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin? And can it tell us what happiness or horror the future holds? But how could anything like a Bible code come about? According to the Bible, a man called Moses was called by God himself to come up on Mount Sinai, where he would be given tables of stone and a law and commandments, quote, which I have written. The book of Exodus paints a vivid picture of Moses and the Israelites before Mount Sinai. And according to the text, God came down to the top of the mountain and spoke to Moses out of a great black cloud. It is an amazing story, if it happened. And if it happened, we still have to try and determine if Moses was responsible for this book, the Torah. And if he was, could the text still be the same today as it was when Moses brought it down from the mountain? After nearly 4,000 years of copying and translation, is that even remotely possible? In 1982, 3 men, all scientists, Eliyahu Rips, Doran Whitsom, and Yoav Rosenberg, decided to see if there was any scientific evidence that a code derived from counting specific numbers of letters in the text actually existed in the Bible. These were internationally renowned scientists risking their reputations on an idea that seems very unscientific. Why? Could it be that after centuries of being on opposite sides, they were looking for ways to bring science and religion together in a single expression of truth? Whatever their reason, that study has sparked worldwide interest in the ancient text and the mystery of the Bible codes, which, by the way, is far from being a new idea.
There's an ancient tradition among Jews concerning the Torah. This tradition claims that unlike all other books of Scripture, the Torah alone was not merely inspired, it was dictated directly by God to Moses in a precise letter-by-letter sequence without punctuation or spaces between words.
Jews and Christians alike have long considered the words of the Bible to be divinely inspired. But this tradition suggests something more. It suggests that God literally wrote the Torah. But is there any evidence that the tradition has some basis in fact?
Well, we need to understand that in the ancient texts, there were no spaces between the words. Scholars call this form of writing scripta continua. In other words, it was just a stream of letters. You inferred where the spaces between the words occurred. Archaeologists have discovered 22-line inscription this way. This is a pretty well-established fact in archaeology. The spaces between the words as we're used to it apparently were introduced during the days of Ezra, much, much later, of course, than the days of Moses.
That means that while Moses was on Mount Sinai, and quite probably for some time after, he was busy writing down in precise sequence the entire 304,805 letters of the Torah. Interestingly, scholars have since found the Bible code present throughout the Old Testament. The question that jumps out at us is why? What could be the reason for requiring such a strict and difficult construction?
It is also part of the tradition that within the precise sequence of letters, there is encrypted information of a sort that only a divine hand could have placed there. However quaint and absurd that might seem, the tradition has a long and highly respected history. Nachmanides, one of the great Jewish sages, teaching in the 12th century, told his students that all of Israel's history could be found in Deuteronomy 32, commonly known as the Song of Moses. Another outstanding rabbi and teacher, who who lived and died in the 13th century, Rabbi Bachya ben Asher of Saragossa, Spain, described a process whereby the skipping of equal intervals of letters in the Torah could lead to obtaining divinely ordained information. And in the 18th century, one of the greatest of the post-biblical sages, Elijah Solomon, known reverently as the Great One of Vilna, made the startling claim that all that was, is, and will be unto the end of time is included in the Torah.
And surprisingly, it is not only religious scholars who have searched the Torah for hidden messages. Some of the world's most notable scientists have searched for the coded information. Sir Isaac Newton served as provost of Cambridge University for many years, and is generally regarded as the first modern scientist. He was also a firm believer in a biblical code.
Isaac Newton was certain there is a hidden code in the Bible. He desperately tried to find it. He learned Hebrew and spent more than half of his life searching for the Bible code. Most of the million or more words in Newton's own handwriting had nothing to do with mathematics or astronomy, but rather esoteric theology. It was clear from the writings that Newton believed that there was a prophecy of human history hidden in the Bible.
Newton was certain the Bible, in fact the entire universe, was, quote, a cryptogram set by the Almighty. But the secret of the Bible code, if indeed it existed at all, eluded the great scientist. Have modern scientists actually found the code? Can computers succeed where men have failed? How did the greatest tragedy in Jewish history set the stage for the scientific investigation of the Bible code? By the time of the Second World War, cryptanalysis, the art of making and breaking codes, was well on its way to becoming a science. A small group of Polish mathematicians had broken the supposedly unbreakable German Enigma code in 1934. When America entered the war, the fledgling U.S. Signal Corps, later the National Security Agency, was able to keep one step ahead of the code, giving Allied generals and admirals advanced knowledge of German strategy. But in order to keep up with a constantly mutating code, they had been forced to devise some means of making huge numbers of calculations. What they came up with was a huge mechanical calculator they called a computation machine. These computation machines made cryptanalysis a viable science. Meanwhile, Rabbi Michael Bar Weissmandl, a childhood Talmudic and mathematical prodigy in Czechoslovakia prior to World War II, survived the Holocaust and after the war emigrated to the United States. Weissmandl, while still a young man, had stumbled onto the notes of the 13th century Rabbi Bachya, suggesting that divine information could be derived from the Torah by means of skipping a specific interval of letters. Now, with all the horror of the Holocaust behind him, Weissmandl returned to the fascination of his youth, the possibility of a mysterious Bible code.
Rabbi Weissmandl, through his diligence and determination in his studies of the Torah, made some remarkable discoveries. In the book of Genesis, if you go to the first equivalent of a T and count 49 letters, and then take the next one, in other words, the 50th letter, is the equivalent of what we would consider a Vav. It's what we consider an O. You count another 50 letters, it's a Resh, or like our R. You count another 50 letters, and you come to a Hey, or like an H. In other words, it's as if you found a T-O-R-H at 49 letter intervals. It spells the word Torah. Rather remarkable in its own right, but one of those things you could dismiss as just a happenstance. But when you get to Exodus, you discover the same thing happens. You come to a T, 49 letters plus 1, you get to the O, the R, and the H the same way. And so again, this starts to look very designed. In fact, it's rather interesting that this number 50 are the number of days from the Exodus to the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. In pursuing this further, you go to the book of Leviticus, the third book, and nothing like this happens. But you go to the fourth book of the Torah, the book of Numbers, the same thing happens, but only if you spell Torah backwards. Kind of weird. You go to the book of Deuteronomy, again you find the equivalent thing, but only if you spell it backwards. Now, you wonder, what does this mean? And you stand back from it all. It's as if those four books are pointing to the middle book, 2 forward, 2 back, to the book of Leviticus. So he examined Leviticus more carefully, and he discovered not 49 letter intervals, but 7 letter intervals. You have the word Yahweh, or the name of God. And you stand back from this whole thing and you realize the Torah is always pointing to the name of God. Rabbi Weissmandel's discovery is the first modern hint of hidden codes in the Bible.
It was the 50-year-old discovery of Rabbi Weissmandel that finally convinced a small group of Israeli scientists that computers might be the key that could unlock the centuries-old mystery of the Bible code. Dr. Eliyahu Rips devised a mathematical model to test the viability of the skip codes that Weissmandel had demonstrated with his work. He enlisted the help of Dr. Doran Whitsom, a graduate student in physics specializing in general relativity, and Yoav Rosenberg, a brilliant young computer scientist. Together, they hoped to prove scientifically whether or not a Bible code existed. It would be a long and tedious undertaking. Let's take a moment here and explain exactly what an equidistant letter sequence, or ELS code, is and how it is constructed, with this simple example. Rips explained that each code is a case of adding every 4th or 12th or 50th letter to form a word. Skip X spaces and another X spaces, and the hidden message is spelled out. Now, this appears to be nothing more than a simple description of ELS coding. But if you begin with the first letter of the paragraph, R, then skip every 3 letters and pick up the 4th letter following, the coded message is revealed. What is infinitely more difficult than deciphering the code is the creation of a surface text that is sensible and easily understood, and yet will seamlessly accommodate specific letters at fixed intervals. In order to test the ELS code theory, the research team created a program according to strict scientific and statistical rules. The usable text would be only the book of Genesis, some 78,000 plus letters. In order to make certain the results could not be tainted by subjective interpretation, they selected the names of 32 of Israel's most famous sages as the target of their search. To make it more difficult, they also asked the program to search for either the target's birth date or death date. After months of work, the complex mathematical model and program was ready. Now it was up to the computer. The results of this test startled even the researchers. All 32 names were there, coded into the text, along with either their date of birth or their date of death. But that wasn't enough for Rips. He wanted further proof. In his final experiment, he took the 32 names and 64 dates the codes had revealed and jumbled them into 10 million different combinations, so that 9,999,999 were a mismatch, and only one was a correct pairing. Then they ran the test again. Only the one correct name and date came together. The odds against this happening by chance, the researchers tell us, are literally 1 in 10 million. Enter Harold Gans, senior cryptologist for the National Security Agency in Maryland. Determined to prove the results were a fluke, he wrote his own program and added the names of 34 more prominent Jewish sages and the cities of their birth or death. What he discovered that fateful day at his office in Maryland was that all 66 names were there, firmly fixed in the code.
The results I got were even more significant than the original experiment done by Whitsom and Rips. At that point, I knew beyond any shadow of a doubt that the code was real. I felt a chill go up my spine.
Encouraged by the results, the study was sent to the prestigious American mathematics journal Statistical Science for peer review and possible publication. Robert Cass, the editor of the Statistical Science Journal and professor at Carnegie Mellon University, is quoted as saying, "Our referees were baffled. Their prior beliefs made them think the book of Genesis could not possibly contain meaningful references to modern-day individuals. Yet when the authors carried out additional checks, the effect persisted. The paper is thus offered to statistical science readers as a challenging puzzle." Hidden from view for thousands of years, the information described by Bacchia and so diligently sought by Weissmandel and other Jewish sages was apparently being confirmed by an unlikely convergence of religion and science.
The Bible code, which is the spelling of words as equidistant letter sequences, can be found in any text, Bible or otherwise. And anytime you have a large number of letters and as many skip possibilities as the Bible code allows, you will be able to find words as equidistant letter sequences.
To demonstrate the possibility that one can concoct an experiment which appears to show that the Bible code is real, we've done it ourselves quite a number of times. For example, the famous experiment that matched the rabbis' names against their dates of birth or death only used a fraction of the names of those rabbis which are used. Not only their normal names, but various nicknames and acronyms and titles by which they are known. By making a different selection of names from the pool of available names, we managed to make an experiment which seems pretty much the same, except that the text that it works for is not the Bible but the Hebrew translation of War and Peace.
The evidence of the reality of the Bible code lays in its statistical analysis. The complexity is not in finding information. The complexity is in knowing how to determine the information that is found and how to judge it as per the actual face value Word of God.
In 1994, Michael Drosnin, a writer and former journalist, flew to Israel to meet with a close friend of then Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. He carried with him a letter with frightening implications.
About 2 years into my investigation, I found encoded the name of the Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin. The only time his name was encoded in the Bible, and crossing his name, as plain as day, were the words, "Assassin will assassinate." I was shocked.
Rabin completely ignored the warning. But on November 4th, 1995, the information encoded in the Bible proved all too true. Rabin was gunned down by an assassin who believed he was on a mission from God. So if the code is divinely ordained, as Rabbi Bakia suggested, then what might it tell us about great biblical warnings, such as the end times?
What is amazing is that whereas the Old Testament tells us very little, if hardly anything, about this person called the Antichrist, we find within prophecies, within the words of the Old Testament, we find Bible codes, prophetic Bible codes, confirming what is being told in the New Testament. We find his involvement, his political involvement with the Middle East. We find the 10 political entities or countries he will rule with. We find his origins. But the details that are given to us in the New Testament are found in the Old Testament if they are sought with ELS codes.
But do the codes deal only with events surrounding Jerusalem or biblical themes?
The tragic events in New York, the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center buildings, have given new impetus on Bible code research, because all the details concerning these events can be found embedded in a Bible code matrix in the Old Testament. First of all, you find the date, September 2001, which appears only once in the whole Old Testament. This date is crossed by words such as 4, planes, 2 buildings, terrorist, Taliban, as well as the name Osama, which appears about 3 times very near that date. Incredibly enough, the words American and United appear in a cluster, as well as the word in the morning, hijacker, Afghan, and war, all together in the same matrix. In fact, the name Osama bin Laden crosses a verse that says, "Terror is in his heart, he who bringeth down the towers."
Computer Bible code software research and development is moving at light-year speed, yet it will be years before the full extent of what the Bible code has to tell us is fully known. And now anyone using a variety of Bible code software products in their own personal computer can search the Bible code. Many of the software packages are easy to use even if the user has no knowledge of Hebrew. You first select the range of text you wish to examine, then select the range of skips you want the computer to use. Then select a word or phrase and the built-in translation feature finds the Hebrew equivalent. Hit the Find button and the search begins. The results can then be displayed on a matrix. The new matrix decoding systems combined with translation software, lexicons, and dictionary searches open up the strong possibilities that people may be able to find themselves and/or future events in the Bible code.
People are so uncertain about the future. They want something that will give them that security of tomorrow. But God has chosen not to give it to us. And the Bible code is certainly not meant to be used for that. It is just basically a magnificent, beautiful, scientific documentation of the multi-dimensional nature of God. It's for us to enjoy, to give ourselves spiritual faith and edification, but not to try to predict. I find it very dangerous when people do that. ELS Bible code within the Hebrew text are not the only codes that exist. A study of the Greek version of the book of Matthew has shown some sort of vocabulary regular sequence within its own self. Also, the King James Version of the Bible shows an uncanny regular grammatical code, even like almost like a dictionary within itself. Now, it seems that when people take on the task of writing the Word of God, God seems to pour extra material in it just to show us its greatness. God knows how much more there is that we haven't discovered.
The Israeli mathematician who discovered the Bible code, Dr. Rips, thinks that we have found only the first and simplest level of a code that is probably far more complex. As a mathematician, his assumption is that if we find this clearer pattern, there is almost certainly a much larger pattern. But we don't yet have the mathematical tools or perhaps the technology to see it.
The possibilities could be endless. The research continues, however, and new, exciting, and controversial information is almost a daily occurrence. But now, for the first time, those seeking answers to the age-old question of the Bible's authenticity can look to science as well as religion.